coffee and tidbits with a morning quip. News, notes, giggles, cut like a knife.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and I hope everybody is looking around the corner because very soon upcoming is going to be the holiday season. And the trees are turning here in the Midwest, and boy, it's just been a beautiful day, but it is at the end of October and leaning into November very, very hard. But anyway, this is Coffee and Tidbits, presentation by the Distillery Channel Media. And as always, with me today, and I'm going to sit back and learn as we all are, Robert Mills coming to us from the beautiful state of California and not high atop a mountain. Hey, Robert, how you doing?
Terrific, Randy. Always a thrill to be with you on this terrific podcast.
Well, as it is an honor for us to have you join us every week and share your wisdom and your worldwide knowledge of not only the mountain climbing, your world travels, going to over 60 some odd countries, and but having been a lawyer of note for many, many years and had a big staff and a lot of travel, a lot of wins in the consumer advocacy, you are very well on today's topic. I know that it's going to be very, very timely because things are going on in our universe that with the country being as it is today, a good cup of coffee and sharing your tidbits along the way. The topic today is going to be what, Dr. Mills?
The topic today is going to be the shadow docket. It sounds sinister. It is, Randy. I've got a fascinating pod for you today, and it's topical. And you're going to learn some fascinating stuff here. We're going to go go into this shadow docket thing and learn what it is, and I'm going to show you why and explain how what it's doing, what the court's doing in the shadow docket is damaging the rule of law, and how as a result of that, as we can see right now. Public confidence in the court, as reported by Gallup polls and all these major national polls, the confidence of the American public in the Supreme Court has plunged to its lowest point ever. It's fallen 47 points since 2018. That's a lot, So the first, Randy, we're going to go way back. They're going to take a fun romp through human history to appreciate what law actually is. It's all going to come back to this shadow docket here, trust me, and what the common law is, why it's important, and why it's important for courts to render decisions in writing, how we got to where we are now. Okay, so whenever I reflect, Randy, on civilization and humans, I'm always struck by how recent it is. Humans are brand new. Civilization is brand new in the history of the world, okay, and incredibly recent. Dinosaurs roamed the earth for 165 million years, whereas humans, the Homo sapiens, evolved from our ape-like ancestors a mere 300,000 years ago. That means that dinosaurs wandered around 550 times as long as humans have roamed the earth, okay? And what we call civilization, which began when humans began to domesticate animals and do agriculture and live in cities and do writing, that's only 6,000 or 7,000 years ago. Okay, that's just nothing. That's 1/50th of the time that human beings were human beings. Okay, and so if you compressed all of that into 1 hour, okay, human existence, we've had civilization for the last minute and 12 seconds. Okay, that gives you a sense of perspective on it. Okay, until civilization, there was no law, there were no courts. Human beings all lived in these small wandering clans of hunter-gatherers. These small human groups were led typically by a single leader, and disputes were resolved by that leader in a very informal way. Because there was no law, the leader just decided who was right based on his own feelings and his instincts about what was right, and there's no appeal. And I've always been fascinated as a lawyer by how disputes are resolved in foreign countries. And as I run around the world, I made an effort to watch court proceedings. And I've seen these white-wigged barristers argue appellate courts in England and France and even Bhutan. I went into this courtroom in Bhutan, And the Bhutanese judge, seeing that there's this strange foreign creature from some other, he invited me back into his chambers, and we had a nice long talk. And so my wife is an amateur anthropologist. I think you know this, Randy, and she's always been fascinated by primitive cultures, and she's been on a quest for many years to find people who are outside civilization, who hadn't reached it yet. And so we went to remote villages in Cambodia, Laos, and Tanzania, and Kenya, and Ecuador, and Bolivia, and Brazil, and Myanmar, and we found that we were too late. Okay, the locals drove motorcycles and they used cell phones. Okay, we were too late. Civilization had arrived. So my wife learned about this Himba tribe, Himba, a Himba tribe in Namibia on the west coast of Africa. Namibia is a huge, gorgeous, fascinating country, Southwest Africa. And has a population of only 2 million. It's huge. So it's very thinly populated. It's a democracy. It's a great place. And it's full of African wildlife, lions, elephants, rhinos, giraffes, pangolins. That's those little sloth-like creatures with scales on them, you know. So my wife researched and researched. She finally finds this tiny resort near the Himba tribe in the extreme north part of Namibia near Angola, a little resort that billed itself as the remotest place in Africa. And it is. Okay. It's 200 plus miles from the nearest village, not a town, a village. Okay. So she booked us a trip there, which was no small feat. It takes 3 days of nonstop travel to get there. We flew to Amsterdam from San Francisco and then to Johannesburg. That's more than 24 hours on an airplane. Then to Cape Town, and then from Cape Town to Windhoek, the capital of Namibia. And then we got on a tiny Cessna that we chartered, okay, with me sitting in the co-pilot seat and my wife in the back with all our gear stacked up. And so we took off and we flew for 3 to 4 hours in that little Cessna. And we landed on this wild strip, you know, amidst giraffes and elephants, you know, looking down at them, you know, and on this desert hilltop. And there's nobody there. We hadn't seen a road or a person the whole time. And so the pilot gets out. There's not even a windsock here. He gets out and there's this platform with these 55-gallon drums, and he pumps gas into the plane. And he gets back in and we take off again. We fly 3 to 4 more hours and we land on top of this gigantic sand dune in the middle of nowhere. And we met there by our guide and a driver who she'd somehow arranged, who spoke the native language. And we descended in this Land Rover and over riverbeds and rocky terrain. And finally, we come to this overlook. You see these great big mountains in the distance. And there was the huge Zambezi River, okay? And on either side of the banks of the river is this green palm jungly thing for about 50 yards. Then it turns back into desert again. And there were 6 tiny straw huts on the river there, next to the river, and that was our resort, okay? And they they had a dining room, and our room was equipped with the modern hotel appliances. Yeah, they had electric generators and propane-powered heaters for hot water and electricity and air conditioning. And so the next day, our guide and driver drives us for miles and miles and miles into the bush, where we arrive at this tiny little Himba village in these mud huts. No cell phones this time, no motorcycles, no vestiges of civilization at all, only Stone Age residents living off water bluff with the blood of the water and the other animals. So they fish in the river and some plants. And so we were invited into the chief's hut. We sat down in there and talked to him for a long time. It was fascinating. Okay. And then he says he had to go because there was a dispute he had to resolve. And this, of course, set me off immediately. And I said, please, I begged him, let me stay and watch, you know, Stone Age justice. And he was reluctant, but he agreed to it. Okay. As long as I kept my mouth shut and sat in the corner. And I told my colleagues, the lawyers, wanted to me to tell them about this. Okay. So this was a dispute between these 2 women. They were topless and they were, you know, and they had disputing over who had rights to a hut there. You know, apparently it belonged to a common relative, and he left, and the litigants, each one of them claimed ownership to promises and from the former owner alleged promises and so forth, and other relatives. And there's no law here. There was just arguments appealing to fairness and entitlement. So the chief listens to everybody, and then he rules in one of the women's favor, and the other was just irate and dejected, and she. But he raises her voice and said, "No, this is the way it's going to be." And she lowers her head. She accepts the decision. And I realized I just witnessed Stone Age justice the way it was for 300,000 years. This is what happened. This is law, okay? The first 300,000 years of human existence, okay? So uh, it was hundreds of millions of years before the first, multi-cell humans, creatures evolved, and then finally, they came. Our appellate, our ape-like ancestors came to existence 6 million years ago, and then took another 1.5 million to the ape-like things could, reach the Homo genus, and then, as we talked about, and that was 2.8. It was only in the last 300,000 years that human beings exist. Homo sapiens. We migrated out of Africa. We were still these Stone Age clans wandering about. And during this period of time, this 300,000 years that humans have been here, there was no law. It didn't exist. Okay, disputes were between clans settled by warfare, and disputes between people in the clan were adjudicated by this clan leader in almost exactly the same way I witnessed in that mud hut in Namibia, exactly what happened. Okay. And so there were projects undertaken by pre-civilized tribes, starting, 7, 8, 9,000 years ago or more. But civilization, as we understand it, okay, began in Mesopotamia, in modern day Iraq, only 5,500, 6,000 years ago. That's just really recent in human history.
That's pretty when you think about it. It's just such a blip in time.
It's just this tiny sliver of this billions of years, and uh, so it was characterized, as we talked, as mentioned earlier, by a rise of cities, domesticated animals, agriculture, and writing. Okay, and as civilization progressed, okay, and the cities arose, and the clans and tribes combined, the leaders of these organizations, they came to be responsible for ever bigger numbers of people, and then kingdoms, and then multiple cities. As a result, the job of resolving disputes is way too much and burdensome for one leader to handle. So they begin to delegate it to members, of the tribe. And this was the first courts and the first, judges, okay, in these courts, okay. And so initially it was just the leader, and it was all arbitrary and everything. But as these tribes had gone, um, it grew in size and everything, it became more and more routine and complex. And so it became clear to everybody they needed to have some sort of, I don't know about who was right, they needed to have some sort of rules. We needed to have some sort of law, and to establish who was right. So law began to be developed. It was a need for it for the first time. This is recently, okay? So these elaborate systems began to be developed in the Middle East, these kingdoms of the Middle East. The first one was Egypt, okay, which was nearly 3,000 years BC, 6,000 years ago. Then came the Code of Elbia in Syria, 2,400 BC. Um, and then the Syrian Code of Uri Namuri in 2,100. And then the famed Code of Hammurabi, most people are aware of, established by King Hammurabi in 1750 BC in Babylonia, okay? And the original of this code, one of the first, laws written down, okay, is in the Louvre. They found it, and it was an original of this cuneiform thing, and they took it to the Louvre in Paris, where it is now. And it's an amazing document. It had in it the provision for the presumption of innocence and crimes. I had no idea it went back that far, and the rights of women in a divorce and property rights and the beginnings of this concept of due process in Babylonia. That's how old it is. So they were written laws, these codes, and not unlike our federal statutes. They derive from custom, religious precepts, dictates of the rulers. And with the rise of the European civilizations after the Renaissance, the idea of rulers providing formal rulings to courts to resolve disputes spread all over Europe. In Spain, a court called the Tribunal of Valencia was established around 1000 AD, okay? And it has been in continuous, uninterrupted operation, this courtroom, okay, for over 1,000 years in the Tribunal of Valencia, okay, issuing rulings nonstop for 1,000 years. So beginning in 1215, with the Magna Carta in England, became the first country to begin retaining and disseminating the written rulings. The court required, the king required these judges to render their opinions in writing, and they collected them and they published them in things called yearbooks that were available to everybody. Okay, and this practice enormously expanded and made cheaper by the advent of the printing press in 1439, which made disseminating it cheap and easy. Okay, so the rulings of the English courts in these yearbooks, they soon established that these rulings became precedents. It established the concept of precedent, meaning that if a judge makes this ruling about this topic, other judges can't overturn it unless it's really important, some important reason it was wrong, okay? But they just generally accepted the precedents, okay? And they couldn't be overturned except in extraordinary circumstances. And equally important in the concept of precedent is the idea that other courts would be following them and they would publish them and so forth. And so this created what came to be known as the common law. And the citizen and the judge could go and find these books and see what on a particular topic and find out what the law is. And it became the first binding body of law in the world in England. And you can imagine how important it is as civilization begins to rise to have a law, in this case, the common law. And it was augmented by the statutes of Parliament. And together, these statutes, together with the rulings of England's supreme judicial body, which was the House of Lords, and these royal court rulings provided for the first time a comprehensive compilation of what the law of England was. This had never happened before anywhere in the world. And as a result, any Englishman, for the first time in history, could say, what does the law say about this or that topic or issue? And they could find an answer, okay? And so this had never, it was extremely important in the rise of civilization for obvious reasons, enormous advance in the concept of the rule of law, because you could speak about the law in a concrete way, not just the speculative way in which exists, but what they might say about this or that. I mean, now you knew what the rule, and what was more important than just knowing what the rule was, which is the reason it was in writing, is it was the rationale for it. Okay, why am I ruling this way? He would cite other precedents, and he would cite reasons and facts, and you would have a reasoned argument. There's the basis for this. This is critically important to what the common law is, because it created a basis for people to criticize it, to scrutinize it, to say this doesn't make any sense for subsequent judges to deal with it. This was the essence of it. It was in writing, and it provided the rationale for why are we doing this, okay? And this goes now coming forward to what's happening with the Supreme Court on the, which I'll get into on the shadow document. So on this, citizens of England, not to speculate about what the courts might do in a particular, there it was, right there. And it was fixed, accessible to everybody for the first time in modern civilization. Everybody could know what the law is and what the law means. Now, when the framers of our Constitution came along, they were very enamored of this whole process, and they all but adopted it, and they set up the Constitution in 1787. They provided for district courts. There was one in each of the colonies, 13 of them. And then there were 3 appellate courts. They were called circuit courts, still called circuit courts. And the Supreme Court was set up above that, and the Supreme Court justices were supposed to, quote, ride circuit, which they literally did. They got on horses and they went around to the 3 circuits, and they sat and they ruled at two appellate judges of Supreme Court. 2 Supreme Court justices would sit on the bench with a local district judge, the 3 of them, and make a decision. And that could be appealed to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court would hear it. Now, the Supreme Court only takes it into discretionary. And today in the United States, we have if you want to appeal a circuit court's decision, you can go to an en banc appeal. Yes, because there's like 40 judges on the Ninth Circuit, and only 3 of them on a panel that make these decisions. You can go to the whole body, and they have to vote whether they're going to do that. But if they do it, you hear for 40 judges, and then you can still appeal that to the Supreme Court, and they get to decide. The Supreme Court gets to decide if they're going to take it or not. Now, we have 100 district courts in the United States, and they're called courts of original jurisdiction, which means that they find the facts. You know, a district judge will say, okay, what happened? In his ruling, he will find that. And then sometimes juries will be able to find portions of it as well, or all of it. And what we have this ruling in the United States, and in England they had as well, is that facts found by the lower court, the district court, cannot be overturned by the appellate court unless the appellate court determines that reasonable minds could not differ, but that fact finding was wrong. If reasonable minds could differ, they had to accept the fact findings of the lower court. So it was very binding in that sense. Like it gave a tremendous weight to a jury or a judge's finding of facts. Now on law, it was a different story. Okay, the appellate court judges gave no deference at all to the judge's rulings about law. They set what the law, so they would de novo from the scratch review that and decide whether the judge was right about the law. This is an important, I think, fascinating factual thing. Reasonable minds differ. I think most people aren't aware of that standard, and I think it's a fascinating standard by which, in America, we decide, which factual findings of courts we accept, and how we go about accepting it. Okay, um, and anybody, any of the appellants who are in front of a judge, they can appeal his ruling, a district court judge. We have 100 district courts. You can appeal that to an appellate court. There's 10 now, 10 circuits. And you can automatic appeal. It's up to you. And you can do it, and they have to take it. And they will give you an appellate review. And that means, like I was just saying, that they give deference to the facts, but they review the law de novo as they decide it is, and they render a written opinion about it. Now, you can turn around and ask for an en banc review, which they rarely ever grant. But then you can also appeal to the United States Supreme Court. You file this writ of certiorari seeking the Supreme Court. They take it discretion. They vote whether they're going to take it or not. And they only take it, it's very important. But one way they almost always take it is if there's two circuits that disagree, because that's intolerable. It creates an uncertainty in the law. If the Ninth Circuit says the President of the United States can order the National Guard to Portland, and this Fifth Circuit in New Orleans says, no, he can't. The Supreme Court, we got to get involved in this. We got to sort this out. Okay. So they will take those cases. Okay. But otherwise, they wait until there's an important federal question. The jurisdiction of the federal courts in the United States is only federal questions in the Constitution. And they leave the rest of it to the state courts. If you have a dispute about marriage or property, it's usually resolved by the state courts. They won't even take it. You don't have jurisdiction in the Supreme Court, in the federal courts, unless there's a huge amount of money involved. Okay. The Supreme Court just takes these important cases and rules on it, and that ruling becomes the law of the land, and all, like in England, the Supreme Court's ruling is binding on the whole country. The appellate court's rulings, the circuit courts, are binding on that circuit. And district court judges are binding in that district to other district court judges. So you have this pyramid of binding on stuff and where it comes from. So the way the Supreme Court, now we're down to the shadow docket, Randy. Okay.
Let me interject, because we have just a few minutes left in this first segment. You've laid the groundwork all the way back from some plane trip that you took, and you sat in on a lack of a better term, a Stone Age ruling, and you've brought us forward that we've only been here about 5,000 years, which is amazing on its own right. The way I feel today, I've lived about 4,900 of them. I've got one of those bodies that low pressure comes in, but I'm just going to lay the feeling just of an old baby boomer that when I was a kid growing up, I always thought when they had the Constitution and the Supreme Court was a very, very austere, 9 people that somehow they were requisitioned from their previous work. They went to Congress, they got confirmed, and then they had this lifetime appointment, and they really, really had the wonderful thoughts of this this thing that was created called the United States of America, wrapped in their hands, that they were going to try to protect the best they possibly could by coming to a mutual collection of esteemed decisions on cases that might get to them, and that they would be one of the major segments or the guardrails of our, protecting society and what the president does and what our legislative body does. And that's how I grew up. And I know that you're going to reaffirm all those conditions in the next
No,
segment.
I'm not. I'm not. Sadly, I'm not.
I know you're gonna tear that Band-Aid off, and I hope everybody sticks with us here, because what Robert is going to do is, I'm going to make it in, I'm just a court jester here, but what he's going to do is he's going to tell us a tale of what's going on today that in some ways is very, very sad, eye-opening, and is very crucial to our society. So with that, we're going to play a couple things that are going to be upcoming. I'm going to be doing a 2-hour special, just as a little plug, of holiday music. That's going to be a 2-hour special, be repeated on through Thanksgiving weekend, but it'll be on the morning of the day before Thanksgiving, when everybody's traveling or cooking food. You can sit and listen to music that'll take us through and a baby boomer's look at the holidays that begin some days before Thanksgiving, and through Thanksgiving, and through the Christmas holiday era, and music that has been originally created by our All the Good Things in Life musical staff. And it is really going to be heartfelt on our part to help everybody with a joyous holiday season. So here's one of the songs from that, and it really is just talking about the transition of fall into Thanksgiving, where we're at right now. And right after, we're not going to listen to the whole song. We'll be right back after a minute or two with part 2 of this bedtime story that Robert Mills has taken us anthropologically through 5,000 years, and now we're going to go from here. But anyway, have a note, and we'll be right back. This is old Uncle Randy, and stay tuned. We'll be right back after just a wee break.
Pumpkin pies cool on the windowsill. The fire crackles, the world stands still. The table's cleared, the stories fade, the season shifts in sweet parade, from orange and gold to silver.
Well, we're all coming back, and I hope you enjoyed that little reprieve. I hope you took filled up the lungs with some fresh air, and getting ready to now hear from Robert Mills all the good things that are happening with our Supreme Court behind the scenes. Robert, take it away.
All right, Randy, we're down to the meat of it here, okay? And that's the shadow docket, a sinister sounding thing here, which I think you will finally agree with me. With people, it is sinister. Now, as we talked earlier, the United States Supreme Court accepts appeals from the 10 circuit courts. It can also accept appeals on original jurisdiction from states. If 2 states sue each other, like California sues Nevada, the court can take that as an original jurisdiction and try it itself. Rarely ever do that, but they do sometimes. But the way it traditionally works, as these cases come up through the ranks, is that there are 2 dockets that evolved over time, okay, to reach the Supreme Court, like ladders that go in there. There's the normal route, okay, which is called the merits docket, okay, which is the normal way to get to the Supreme Court. And to get to the Supreme Court in the merits document, both sides have to file an extensive briefing. about what the case is about. You know, the appellate court, the person appealing files first, and then the person defending files a reply brief. I mean, an opposition brief, and then the person who's filing gets to file a reply to that. So there's elaborate briefing. It's lengthy, it's detailed, and then people who have an interest in this, the public, generally people can come in and file amicus curiae briefs, which means friend of the court.
Mhm.
And oftentimes these Supreme Courts, you get hundreds of people. Anybody can file an amicus brief, and you go in and you file and you say, I think this side should win, and here's why. And the court actually welcomes this because a lot of experts, a lot of heavy duty people can come in and file a bunch of stuff. And the court, can look at it and respond to it or not. But they try to be helpful to the court in ruling on it. And I remember when there was an appeal to the Ninth Circuit of the pistol statute in the banned pistols in San Francisco, and of course this was the Second Amendment issue, okay, and so it brought out all of the National Rifle Association people that was falling about the Second Amendment. There's also another group or two that filed just lengthy encyclopedia examples that said that the Second Amendment was never intended to provide an individual right to bear arms. It was a collective right, of the different states, in their militias, and explain that whole history and said this whole thing is a complete distortion. It was imaginary. It was made up by the NRA in recent years. And if you go back, many states had banned guns, and even Tombstone, Arizona banned them, I mean, and nobody ever thought to say, well, the Second Amendment, so anyway, so that became this great, pile on of amicus briefs of everybody and his brother. There's the briefing, okay, in which everything gets laid out, and that's available to the public. You can go read these briefs. You can see the arguments. One of the things that as a young lawyer I discovered is that, if you look at the appellant's brief, you think, wow, how are we even here? This is so clear. He's going to win. This is just absolutely absolute. And then you read the opposition. Whoa, he forgot to say this, and what about this one? And when you get done with them, in most cases, they actually get to an appeals court, and especially the Supreme Court. You look at them and you think, wow, I sure glad I don't have to decide this. It looks like they're both right.
Wow.
That's the way, so you have the briefing that goes on, and with all this reasoned evidence about how the case should be decided, and then the court goes back and they have this in their chambers, and they debate it in this private thing among themselves, and then they rule on it. And when they rule on it, each justice of the 9 justices gets to file his own opinion. Now, typically, they join with others, and oftentimes, the majority of the time, actually, they all agree. And that's something not generally known, is that most decisions are unanimous. All 9 judges, despite their extreme differences on some things, all agree. And so the court reads it in per curiam by the court brief that all 9 of them sign on to this one decision. There's one reasoning in it. So that's. But if a judge disagrees with the reasoning or the outcome of things, then he or she can file their own dissonant brief, dissenting brief. And they do, as you know, all the time. And the judge elaborates his own or her own, this is wrong for these reasons, and you're making a terrible mistake. And they go on and on. And there's this great history of this going back 200 years, where many times the dissenting view eventually persuades people and becomes the dominant view in America. So it starts out sometimes as a dissent, works its way forward. People say, you're right about that. And it becomes the final. So there's opinions are rendered on both sides. The public can read them. They're published on the internet, and you can go and see what the court said, and you can see what the dissent said, and you could get this real detailed, compelling, articulate exposition of what the whole thing is about. Okay, back to the common law thing and how important that is. The public can then see what the Supreme Court ruled, why, and if there's dissent, what the dissent is, and how that might potentially affect future opinions. And there it all is, laid out. It can be criticized, it can be agreed with, disagreed with. It puts it in this transparent format for the public that is readily available, and that's one of the great strengths of our system is it has that, and people can disagree or they can agree, and they can see where all the justices are coming from. And it's this wonderful intellectual exercise that's healthy for democracy and healthy for the law.
Well, we
Okay.
want to thank you, Robert, for that great report. Now we have to continue on. What is our next show going to be? There's no bottom line. Is there something you're trying to say that's not going to be exactly this today, Robert?
Wait a minute. Then we have, that's the merits document. I just told you how the merits docket works. Okay.
The merits docket.
Now we have what they call the shadow docket. It's sometimes called referred to as the interim docket.
Interim
And
docket.
docket emerged because of emergencies. Another term people call is the emergency docket. Let's say that you have a prisoner who's going to be executed at noon.
Yeah.
Suddenly discovers this witness who says, here's proof he didn't do it.
Right.
And so he races to the Supreme Court, and he doesn't have time for this very lengthy, elaborate merits document. So he runs to the court and says, I'm going to be executed at noon. Stop it,
Please.
please. And so the court in the interim of the interim docket, typically they don't allow just very minimum briefing, okay, and they oftentimes don't issue opinions. They just say yes, stayed, or no, not stayed, and that's it. And so you don't know the reasoning for the interim ruling. It's just a summary short skeleton thing here designed to address emergencies. And sometimes it's used to address non-controversial procedural things that nobody, happy to see it addressed that way.
You would think that gentleman that's on the timetable, if they said no, he might want to have an opinion on why they said no, other than no.
Well,
No?
I mean, you would, but he it's almost always granted if it's a situation where they're not really ruling on the merits of
Right.
it. They can come back to that, but what they're just trying to stay something to avoid injustice. Okay, and so it had a very narrow purview, and it was important and essential that there be this avenue. Okay, but it was never intended, as it's being used today, to hide the court's rulings and the rationale for the court's rulings.
Wait a minute. You said as it's being used today. Is something going on today, Robert?
Well,
Different?
we have something going on today, Randy. It's extreme politics, and so what the Supreme Court in the United States has started doing, and they've done it like 30 times in a row, is when a case comes up from the administration involving the administration doing something, like just say, for example, the sending troops to Portland, National Guard to Portland, they take it on the interim docket. And they just make this one sentence ruling, and that's it. And so you're having this very broad series of very substantive cases involving very critically important issues that are being resolved when no one knows who voted how. There's no rationale for it. There's no transparency. It is immune to scrutiny. And they just come up with this. And and what's even more important is it defeats the concept of common law. In other words, with the common law, every judge could see what that judge who ruled, why he did it, his rationale, his motives. I mean, the facts. He goes into all this, and you can agree or disagree. But here, you don't know what the basis was. So just yes, no. And so another judge or another appellate court ruling on the similar set of facts has no idea whether in their case, with this difference or that difference, it's still covered by that decision. That's the wonder of the common law, the elaborate decisions. You know what it covers. It spreads out the shadow and says, this is what, or this light. It says this is what this means, and this is how it's to be used in the future. But with the shadow doctrine, you don't know. So judges are in the dark about what precedent it actually is there. What is the common law on this subject that the court just ruled on? Does it
Oh,
mean
so
this?
let me ask you a
Does it
question.
mean that?
Just out of curiosity, all these recent so-called rulings on the shadow docket, in our culture today, do these rulings lean politically one way or another in
Oh,
favor of
absolutely. They're 100% uh, super far right Republican pro-Trump rulings.
that is shocking. Again, I'm appalled. I had no idea there was gambling in the back room. One, it's again, there's no water in the desert, and I have no idea why Bogey went to Casablanca. But all of them are right wing. Oh,
They're far right wing, and
far right.
they're decisions that
Now, wait a minute. I mean, all due respect, and this is the thing when I knew we were lining this up, and over the past week, looking at what is going on in America today, it has been destroyed brick by brick, stone by stone, being torn down, and now it's invaded the Supreme Court, which was supposed to be, I don't know if you'd call it the third rail, or at least a set of rails, maybe 9 rails that people had the sensitivities of the goodness of the greatness of the United States of America now being used as a political arm of one of the parties.
that's why, Randy, the public, you ask people in a poll, do you trust the Supreme Court?
Yeah,
Historically, the answer was overwhelmingly yes. The court was restrained. It
right.
was neutral. It saw itself as the neutral. That's what a judge is supposed to be, neutral. And they stood above politics. And they had the interests of the great public in the long term in hand. Okay. That perception of the court is gone. And today, the partisan spread between what Republicans think about the Supreme Court versus Democrats is like, God, it's 80% different. I mean, it's unimaginable. It's like two different countries here, two different worlds, how they see that. And so for the first time, the court always in its history has had a very high confidence rating by the American people. They acted in a way that, just sought to cultivate the sense of wisdom and neutrality and best interest and above the fray. It's gone. And these rulings, one after the other, have done huge damage to the reputation of the court and to our political system generally, because people need to trust the courts. They need to think that, which isn't to say the court's always been popular and the decisions were always popular and everything they did was right. But in the great mass of the cases, to the great mass of the American people, they managed to steer under turbulent times and difficult times. They managed to steer a pretty straight, narrow route. Today, it seems like they've gone off the rails, and we have all kinds of things going on. And this past weekend, the thing that's blowing me completely away is all these discussions about ways in this gerrymandering of how we can dismantle the very concept of democracy. Democracy means that if you have the majority of the votes, you win, and your point of view prevails. And if you rig it up so that 40% can control it, and if you have 60%, you lose. We don't have democracy anymore. We have something else. And that's where we're headed, full speed ahead right now is an effort. And then they're all this talk now about how they're going to federalize the elections, whatever that means, and they're going to installing people now in state courts to override the vote and refuse to certify, just like they tried to do in 2020 but didn't, and just ignore the popular vote. And the popular vote in the United States, I think most people notice, was 176,000 precincts in 2024 and 2020. There was, and only people who can vote there are people who live there. Only people who can count them people who live there, and they just report them up. There's only 1,100 people on average in a precinct. Sometimes a lot lower than that. And they can sit around, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, sit around a room, elbow to elbow, count the votes together, and then report them up to the state. It's almost impossible to imagine how you could rig that. And in order to do it, I mean, I ask people who call my history tours, they're magas, and I say, well, how do you suppose they did that? And they look, and I tell them about the thing, and I say, in order to have an outcome determinative change, you'd have to get 50,000, 100,000 people, including Republicans, in on a conspiracy that would send them to jail for 20 years. And these are people who are not these people have been poll sitters for, poll workers for 30 years, and they're not political that way. How would you get that many to go to jail or risk, I mean, it's not possible. So the only way that they could rig the election was to simply say, well, we're not going to accept that outcome. We're going to, which they had people trying to do, and say, even though the Democrats got 55% of the votes, we're going to go the other way. That's just flat out shredding the concept of democracy. And it's underway right now on a grand scale, putting people in these states, the swing states, North Carolina being one of them, where they are pledging that they're just going to vote, they're going to vote for the Republican nominee, no matter what the outcome is. And that's not democracy, and our experiment, which has gone along really successfully here for almost 250 years, is now in real trouble. I mean, it's in real.
Well, Governor Newsom, I mean, Attorney General Pam Bondi said that they're going to send election watchers or judges or Gestapo, whatever the hell, excuse me, going to California to watch the elections. And Governor Newsom says, well, they're going to have, for every one that they send, they're going to send 4 to every precinct to watch the election. So you're going to have watchers watching the watchers watching. I mean, it's, it's just so incredible.
If all we have here are people who are, quote, monitoring the election. Now, we did that in the past when there were in the South, when people were intimidating Black people from voting and stuff, to be assured, they had federal monitors to be sure that Black people could vote without being harassed or beaten and stuff. And if all they're doing is standing around to be sure that there's no intimidation, that people get to vote and everything, that's not going to be outcome determined. It's not going to change anything. But what we're worried about, what does it really mean? That does it mean something else? Are they going to come in here and do what ICE is doing and pull people out of cars and intimidate them and arrest them and stuff? And
what keeps ICE from watching the polls? I mean, just to intimidate people going to the polls. Only
people who can vote are citizens. And,
right.
There's been all this talk about election fraud. The United States has had its elections monitored closely for decades and decades. And the number of fraudulent votes cast is astronomically small. I mean, they've done this over and over again, both parties, everybody. It's like 1 in a billion votes or something. I mean, it's just non-existent of people voting, twice and that kind of stuff. I mean, it just doesn't happen because the safeguards are there. And these polls are small. People all know each other. They've been voting in that same place for 200 years. And, the algorithms could pick up, any kind of deviation if it was more than 2%. And so, and you'd have to, and to keep the ballots under lock and key with video cameras on it and law enforcement, it's almost impossible to envision how you could actually rig the actual vote itself. Now, it's another thing altogether to have somebody, say, well, okay, we're just not going to accept that. We just,
Right.
It's rigged. Just like when people say, there's climate change is a hoax. That this mountain behind me is named for John Tyndall, this Irish physicist with a PhD who discovered climate change in 1859. He published this thing. He said, volcanoes put carbon dioxide, warms the air, glaciers retreat, plants and trees take it out, sequester underground coal and gas, and makes the glaciers, makes it colder. What is it about that, the third grader can understand, that you don't understand or agree with? And they look at me like, because they don't know anything about them.
Well, again, we've made so much money by other countries paying their tariffs that it's absolutely incredible. Let's see, not $1 has been paid by a foreign country to any tariff that's been charged. It's all been charged to
American consumer.
American consumer, and it's going to get worse. I mean, we're sitting on before November when we know that this shutdown that's ongoing right now, where people are going to lose, their wages. I mean, air traffic controllers are missing a paycheck. You've got people on the food, even in the red states. One of the red states has 600,000 people. They're going to lose their food stamps come this Saturday. So we're the richest country in the world, and we can send billions of dollars to a favored nation in South America, but we can't find a way to feed our own people, pay our own air traffic controllers. I was looking at a plane flying today. I live in sort of the landing pattern of O'Hare, and you see these planes relying on air traffic controllers that aren't going to get a paycheck this week. And what, they still have to put gas in their car to drive to work, to feed their families. And
Right.
where do they get the money to put the gas in the car? Because price of gas hadn't gone down. If you go buy a steak somewhere today, a steak or a hamburger in the market's $10 a pound. $10 a pound. Go through McDonald's. Small cheeseburger, fry, and a Coke used to be under $1 when we were a kid. $7.89 for a small cheeseburger, small fry, and a small Diet Coke. The prices of eggs are not going down. They've gone up. The things that were promised by the Trump organization are not happening. And he's not, when they now, in your words, in this completely thunderous dialogue, you have taken us over the past 5,000 years to a place where what used to be highly regarded our Supreme Court is just now really in the pocket of the right wing. It's very, very sad. And it's worn people out. If you want to go out and talk to people, and I talk to people every day to the point where my voice is shot. It really is. I mean, people are coming to me and saying, you got to get on, you got to get on, you got to get on, you got to help. Well, we're trying to help by educating people, and you do a marvelous job, Robert, of helping people really understand history because of your practice of being a lawyer, and being a highly regarded and highly respected leader in your own community, and letting people understand where we're at today. And it's just, I think people fundamentally understand it if they can watch something other than Fox, watch a lot. But
That's
it's
that's a big factor, Randy. I mean, I lead history tours for the city of San Francisco, and people come from all over the world on my tours, and I engage them on this stuff, and you can see that what happened in our country is that there was this shattering of the common fact basis, that we had Walter Cronkite, and the other two networks, and everybody watched that, and we all had a common set of facts. And then the right winger came along, and the Fox News, and they go, well, we'll get our own thing, and we'll keep these people in the dark about cutting off their health care and this and that and the other, and they won't know, and we'll feed them this red meat stuff. And what I see when you turn on Fox, what you see in the right wing is all this hatred against extremists, against these imaginary creatures called liberals, which are caricatured into some, just unrecognizable thing. And people are taught to hate them. And they're taught that if you, on this other side, you can do something against these liberals. And it's really hard to have a dialogue unless you have some common facts and you have, you can agree. And so what we've shattered that with this, and it's making it harder and harder for America to exist and to have a common political culture, because we have to have some common facts that we all agree on, like you were just saying, I mean, and so, they're saying that the immigrants create all this crime. Immigrants create a fraction of the crime per capita than native-born Americans. And so, there's all these things, and 85% of the people on Obamacare are Republicans. They don't know that they're about to get cut off. They don't understand that, and so they live in this bubble. Which doesn't say that certain areas on the left aren't in bubbles, but there's too much bubbles, and we all need to be in the same common thing here. And so what's happening to the Supreme Court, sadly, is part of this shattering of the common perception of things and shattering of the norms. It was always the norms that the court would get in the middle and be above the fray and be neutral.
Right.
And let people hear the arguments. The idea that it would sneak around and render these one sentence rulings always in favor of the administration without any rationale, even though they violate every precedent down the line. They're just throwing this whole concept of common law and precedent out the window, and throwing out the transparency, and the purpose and the reasoning, which we talked about here, this thing about the whole benefit and the whole reasoning for having common law. Why do we have a common law, and why does it benefit society? It benefits enormously because everybody can see what it is and we can talk about it, and that you can disagree with it or not disagree. You can't do that if you have a one sentence ruling.
No.
We no longer have precedent or common law. We have something else, and it's very scary, and it's very disturbing. And of course, we have a lot of other stuff going on disturbing, but just limiting it here to the Supreme Court, which I've been trying to cover, and this history. This is something completely contrary to our 1,000-year history of the common law in the English tradition from the Magna Carta, almost 1,000 years, and where they originated the idea of precedent and published opinions, and we've adopted it by our founding fathers. It served us really well, and it's being just thrown out the window, and it's sad.
Couple things. We had to come to a conclusion here and close it, but 7 million people marched last Saturday, I think it was.
8.2
million. So it gives hope to the country, and they were not wackadoodles. They were not Antifa. They were not the spurless. I mean, it makes Speaker Johnson look ridiculous, and those people go out and what the names that they call good citizens that are out saying, what we have going on right now is not America. No kings. And to sit and watch the Republicans have all lost their spine in the House and in the Senate because they know if they speak up, they don't qualify for another job anywhere because they're going to be they fear of losing their own job. It's just very, very sad, but hopeful when you see 8.2 million. What I didn't know, I didn't hear that number. That's great, and even more to come. But Robert, we got to close. What we're going to do, we are going to give hope to the world and to the holidays and to Thanksgiving. And I still think we have a lot to be thankful for. So I'm going to send you out a note. I want you to be part of our holiday show. We're going to be sitting down and just interviewing and getting to know all the people that are part of Live Eco Style and Distillery Channel on a very, we're going to give you 5-10 minutes on our show just to talk about you and your family and your hopes, aspirations, where you've been, next mountain you're going to climb. And everybody's going to find out a little bit more about Robert Mills during our Thanksgiving show. And then between now and then, Robert's going to go mountain climbing. And hopefully, if the snow isn't so bad next week, maybe give a report from there. But Robert today was very, very, I guess, enlightening because a lot of people, the history of law, obviously, from the ages on back all the way to the front. You did a great, beautiful picture of painting where we're at today. And everybody out there, just be aware of what's going on in America. Because right now, we don't want to, America is this greatest experiment, and there's a lot of people that are worn out, but I think more of us are really hopeful. We want to return to the guardrails of what America is really all about. And with that thought in mind, Robert, thank you very much for today.
Thank you, Randy.
It's always great. It's always a pleasure. And for Coffee and Tidbits and our whole team, always remember, as my grandfather told me, and it still holds true, is that no matter where you go, always leave a better footprint because you never know who's watching. So for my grandfather, for Distillery Channel Media LLC and Robert Mills, this is old Uncle Randy saying tune in next. We'll let you know when it's going to be on Coffee and Tidbits. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Robert.
Bye.
It ain't about pushing or shouting the loudest. It's the soft-spoken questions that open up hearts.